Hey, welcome back. We're going to take a look at kind of wrap up our little quick friendly animating for riggers. Sorry, rigging for animators section here, and I'm going to quickly show you a way to do faces that is just a little bit different than a lot of the other methods that are out there. Through the years, I found myself struggling with facial performance in a lot of ways because the controls have been always so abstracted from the character themselves. Um, uh, it's neat and kind of cool when you have these the little windows with the little sliders and stuff like that, and you can kind of control them, but there is a sort of abstraction. It's why I use a Cintiq and stuff when I animate. As much as possible, I mean, the digital medium of computer graphics animation has already put so many layers between me and the performance. A hand-drawn animator, there is no layers between them and what they're making. The pencils in their hand, the papers in their hand. They draw a line, and that's it. It's very tactile. It's very real. Stop motion animators, similar way. There's a physical puppet, and they grab it with their hands, and they move it, and they shape it, and they sculpt it. It's a very tactile, very I think emotionally powerful way to animate. And facial animation is difficult in CG because of the levels of abstraction. Already, I'm dealing with some kind of it's a digital representation of pixels. There's nothing here. The power goes out. All I got is an object in my monitor. I have nothing. So the ethereal quality of computer graphics animation is already enough of a barrier. Um, Not being able to grab it directly, the lines are drawn for you as a mathematical representation of the geometry, and as being defined. Your control over that is fairly limited in a lot of ways. When you start doing facial stuff and you have to drive everything from a list of attributes on the side or a window of little controllers that are not part of what you're doing with the face, you end up having to kind of bounce back and forth between what I call a left brain and a right brain space, a technical space and a creative space. I find that the creative space, if I can stay there, I get my best work done. If I'm not at all intimidated by the technical stuff, I'll be technical all day, but I like to be there. Um, and when I'm being creative, I like to be there. And different days, I feel like doing different things. I mean, I'm not always one or the other, but I really like the idea of creating on-face controls for animating faces. And there's any number of ways to do that. I'll show you one methodology. What I'm going to do is, this is our control rig. I haven't done anything more to this, to fix up the skinning. I just showed everybody how to fix up the skinning and everything like that. And when you do your own rigs, I suppose that you'll end up, using either the component editor or skin weighting, painting tools to get your character to deform nicely. Um, you can make design choices that make that job easier. This is not the best design choice for making skinning of a body easy. In fact, it's a rather challenging design choice for a number of reasons, and I can point them out to you. One, his hands are big and blocky, so there's not a lot of, you don't have a lot of definition in the fingers. They're stubby and short, and they're clumped together. So getting good blending of finger controls there is a bit of a challenge. You end up with some uh, less than easy things to set up. If I go ahead and just kind of take these things, and some of these things make the job easier. Here we're seeing some of that separation issue going on with the joints of the fingernails off the joints, like I showed you in the previous video. We'll show you a way to get around that in this video as well if you have that problem. So by using a lot of joints, we help ourselves, but it's still not super elegant, super easy. There's a pretty nasty bit of business right there. That's a modeling problem on my part. It's failure to clean up some aspects of the mesh, but this is a temp character. I'm probably not going to use him. Um, Another design choice that makes it difficult is he's fat. Okay, fat characters are really kind of challenging to work with. He's a single mesh, meaning uh, you know the part that is his foot is also his hands, so it's difficult to break him up. Um, you can make design choices to make that job easier. If he were thinner, okay, that would help. if he had you know, different parts of his body, so that his pants was a different mesh than his shirt, was a different mesh than his arms and hands. Okay, anytime you break those things up, you kind of make your job a little bit easier in some places, especially if you make the breaks happen at parts that are simple to solve. Like a t-shirt is a really good solution because the shirt ends in the middle of the arm. There's not a lot of deformation that happens in the middle of an arm, upper arm. Okay, it's a good place to make a break with a new piece of geometry. Same thing with like ankles and pants and shoes and stuff like that. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of twisting going on, but you can bring the pants down over that and kind of hide a lot of that business. Um, Making belt at the waist allows you to do some things there. Having an actual neck and an actual head makes a lot of that stuff simpler too, because you're creating this space, this negative space between all these various parts of the body, and the negative space allow you to kind of isolate some of these more challenging, you know, difficulties in setting up a character. So by kind of building in this negative space a little bit between these things, you make your job simpler. Okay, chubbier characters are kind of swallowing up the negative space inside themselves, so they present different challenges. So this isn't the best design for simple to rig, but I'm showing you with a less than ideal design that you can still do it, and it doesn't necessarily need to be rocket science. All right, let's get in here and take a look at one thing I want to do is show you we can fix this horn thing or the nails thing by using a tool, another free tool, which is very neat, called DG Rivet. Okay, again, this is from creativecrash.com. DG Rivet is a fantastic tool. If you have Maya 2010 after, they got rid of the differentiation of between ultimate or complete, or I don't know what the deal was. Complete wasn't complete, I don't know. It needs hair, is all it needs. It needs the hair technology. If you have older versions of Maya, then you'll need to use the extreme top of the line one that has hair. This uses hair follicles to attach objects to other objects. It's pretty simple. It's free. You can get it. And I have it on a shelf in here along with a bunch of other things right there. Okay. So what you can do is you select one character. You select the object that you want and the object that you want to stick it to, and you run rivet. Oh, gosh, it wasn't constrained. Why? Script editor. Let's take a look at that. This is what you run into when you do rigging. Sometimes you get something and it doesn't work. If you remember before we tried skinning this, whenever you skin something in Maya, it will take all of these transforming attributes and it locks them. That's why it's gray. Okay. And rivets need things to be free. So you just go ahead, select all those channels and choose unlock selected. And now that should work. So you select the object you want to stick and the object that you want to stick it to, and then you run the rivet, and there you go. What that does, if you zoom down in here, I don't know if you can see it, but there's this red thing right there. That is a hair follicle. Alright? And what that does is that sticks to the red surface here, okay? and that is defined by a UV position. So there it is. The UV position tells you where on that mesh that little particle is. That little hair follicle is then constraining this thing. That's why this needed to be free. You see that? This little mesh thing right now is constrained to that hair follicle. So now if we take the head and we rotate it and we move it, see the horn sticks to the head accurately. We're going to use that quite a bit. The DJ rivet is really handy for sticking things to a mesh. Like the horn, you can do that for the fingernails, you can do it with the eyes. So if you wanted to, you could take one of these eye joints, we can just, the rig actually makes eye joints, so you can get that for free. But what you may end up with is that because we use the heat map skinning, it may, much like the horn before, it may not move exactly. So a lot of times what I'll do is I won't use these eyeball joints so much, but I will rivet the eyeballs to the head in this instance because they're sitting on top, kind of like a Muppet, So what I would do then is I'd take the eyes and I'd find them in here, and I'd make a group, and I would center the position of that group. So I'd modify center pivot, okay, and just take the group and stick it to the body, okay. So what that group has got the eyeballs in it, but now it is constrained to another hair follicle somewhere in here, right in front of his head. And so now when we move his head around, his eyeballs go with it. And you can do that with the teeth and the tongue and all that stuff as well. All right. If you want to have control over these things, it's a good idea to do what I did. Make a group over that particular object. I have a little script here I wrote a long time to do that, where you select the object and it basically just groups under something, keeps the pivot the same, and calls it, it's just a dumb little script. But same idea is it takes the teeth geometry, puts it under a group. Now what you can do is that group geometry, again, we can just rivet that to the head. So if we do the same thing here, rivet that to the head, do the same thing with the tongue. A tongue you may want to do with bones, but that's another thing. It's a pretty straightforward sort of deal. And we'll do that, and then we'll take this last one, and we won't even bother grouping that. We'll just rivet that. So very quickly with that little rivet tool, we got the whole head moving. Well, this was supposed to be sticking to the head. Where did it go to? Where's follicle 6? Where are you, follicle 6? Follicle 6 ended up being down in the bottom of him. It's one of those instances where follicle 6 didn't know where to go in its UV space. It's the one drawback of the DG rivet tool. So what you can do then is just take that. Actually, you can just select this. Select that dude right there, and actually select the parent constraint. Object. Select the node, which is probably parent constraint. It's nothing. That tool doesn't work. I didn't think it did. It never does. That's why I use this silly dumb thing up here all the time. All the time I use this, because it's just, I end up finding it simpler. I just want follicle 6, but so I just go up here and type, well, I'm not even sure what that is. If I want the connections to this thing, I select the name here, just highlight it, copy it, paste it, and hit enter, and now I've selected that thing. It's just easier to deal with. And then if I go to my hyper shade thing again and bring that up and then map that, well, that was supposed to be easier. Jeez Louise. I could just zoom in and choose follicle 6. I'm an idiot. Sometimes there's too many ways to do something. Anyhow, I want follicle 6 to be up here somewhere and not down there somewhere. Okay. So I could, change it, but the horn goes sliding off because it's constrained. So I need to take that parent constraint and just get rid of it for now. And then just take this thing, and I need to change this Again, good UV mapping makes this job simpler, but if I change the numbers here to something, it can't be outside of 1, so if I do like 2 or something like that, it's a hassle, okay? But you will sometimes end up doing that where you have to change the UV values to get that thing up here where you want it. A good way to do that is you take a look at your UV outliner or your UV texture editor thingy dingy, and you figure out where is the horn on this thing. Well, the horn on this thing should be somewhere up in here. So because it's the same UV space on both sides, I think it is anyways. I don't think there's anything outside of it. It's kind of a funky way of doing UV splitting. I kind of inherited it. So whatever the UV value is for the one is going to be for the other. But the reason why this is not working out right, as I'm sitting here mumbling my way through it, is because the UVing job on this character was not that good. Because it wasn't that good, I'm making problems for myself later on. So it's instructive, you know, to see that I've kind of painted myself in the corner by using a half-baked UV solution. You really don't want your UVs to be where you only see half the character in the UV space. In the other half, you don't know where it is, okay? And right now, I only have half the character in here. There's any number of ways that could happen. I'm not going to get into it. You could talk to your modeling friends about how that happens. If you have someone model a character for you and you want to just rig it up for you, well, just ask them to UV it for you, and 99 times out of 100, any modeler who's worth his salt is going to give you a really good UVing job, okay, because that's part of their job. They do it all the time. So if you find yourself, oh, I'm intimidated by UV editing, ask a friend to help you out. There's people out there who will do that, and you can do that for you. I just did a really kind of sloppy job, and I painted myself into a corner. So again, my mistakes are your instruction. Alright, so aside from all that, that's how you stick stuff on there. But how about these face controls? Well, the most popular way people do facial controls is through blend shapes, alright, or morph targets, you know, however you want to call it. Back in the day we called them morph targets. Maya gave them names, blend shapes, and ever since then that's kind of what people call them. It's pretty simple. You take a duplicate of an object and you channel it in, and you give it it's given us a bit of a slider, and you can change it. Okay, so we can duplicate this and unlock its translates and move it over here. Alright, so let's say we make a copy of this guy, and we'll just deform him. I'll grab one of my little deformer tools here. Well, let's go ahead and just grab vertex. Okay, let's just grab a bunch of vertices, make a cluster, pull that cluster up. Hooray! Okay, looks like poo, but what you do is you take that, and then you select that, and then under Create Deformers, choose Blend Shape, and you give it a name. I usually put BS at the end to help me understand that that node is a blend shape. And that's pretty much it. And you create it, and what that does is it puts a controller or an input on this character called whatever name it was, temp. And in there you have these sliders. Alright? Most of us are familiar with this stuff. Okay, there's also the window, animation editors, blend shape editor, and that will give you a slider here. Alright, but hardly anybody ever uses these things anymore because it's kind of clunky. Okay. We're going to use blend shape. What you would normally find people do is they make blend shapes of all these different possible combinations. You know, this corner of the mouth up, that corner of the mouth down, this part of the lip up, that part of the lip down, and you end up with an input list that's just like dozens and dozens of different shapes, and different controllers drive them. Okay, that is very, very typical. We are going to go ahead and use a blend shape, but we're going to use it a little bit differently. Get rid of that. We're going to take this this temp BS, and we will select that and then delete it so that we don't have it anymore on this character. Let's go ahead and make a duplicate of his mesh, and then I will move it off to the side here. Okay, and I will create a blend shape going into this mesh from this one. So from here to here, just like I showed you, create deformers, blend shape, and we'll call it body face BS. Okay, so I've created it. So whatever I do to this copy over here will show up on this one. Kind of interesting. One thing you will have to keep in mind though is when you do that, you have to be mindful of deformation order. Okay, it's a really kind of esoteric concept, but Maya is trying to figure out on this character, I got a bunch of deformers. In what order would you like me to solve them? Okay, whichever one is top on the stack is the last one that's solved. Since we did the skinning before, and now we've made the blend shape after, the last one made is the blend shape. So it will be the last one to be resolved. What does that mean? I move his hands up here, it moves the way I want to. Now I want to do something with his face, and oops, what happened to his hand? What happened is, Maya's like, I'm just following orders, mister. You told me to solve this thing last. Well, I have. And when I solved that, I overrode everything else. Well, we don't want that. We want the opposite. We want the blend shape to come. We actually want the skeleton to be last. Well, the easiest way to do that, in fact, the only way to do that, and it's terribly documented and it's a terrible interface, you select the mesh, you right click, and you choose Inputs. And then you wait for this other sub-menu, and you go all the way down to All Inputs. That will bring up a window that's a list of all the input operations for the body. An input is whatever is causing this thing to do whatever it does. We'll see here in the list, if we take a look at it real quick, the last one in line is the blend shape. It's the one on top. That's the one that gets solved last. That's why it went back down here. His skin cluster is being solved beforehand. That's why when we didn't have any shape from this over here active, his arm moved okay. So let's go ahead and put this back to 0. And then what we'll do is we'll select this guy again. Now here's the part where the feedback is terrible. To change this order, there's no way to select this. All right, there's no info. You middle mouse that, and you'll see a little plus sign right there, and you drag it beneath that. Terrible, terrible. There's no highlighting or anything. It's very, very hard to know you even did anything, but it should redraw and show you, hey, looky, looky. The skin cluster, which is all the joints, is now the last one being solved, and the blend shape is second to last. So now what we have, close that, is we can move the arm around and then come over here to his body face thing, and that could be on or off or whatever, and it will be exactly what we want. Okay, it will behave a certain way. Now his hand, I duplicated it with his hand having some motion on it, so that's also sloppiness on my part because I'm doing this on the fly. But now what we have is if we take this and we deform it any way whatsoever. Well, something odd happened there. You'll notice that it's now nighttime. I stopped in mid-sentence and I'm wearing different clothes. The video recording software stopped and I didn't know it, so I actually finished this video, and it was great, but it wasn't recorded, so now I'm going to do it again, so you guys get the benefit of me finishing it up for a second time. So anyways, where it crashed, I was talking about the reordering of the deformation inputs into the skin, and the nice thing is when you do that, you come over here, whatever you move over here now layers in on top over there, okay? But it's still free to let you move things, all right? So that allows you to do things that you want to do with the face, but still keep the body animation, okay? Now, here's a mistake I made, and I leave this mistake in here so that you can see it for yourself. You'll notice that the fingers and the fingernails don't line up. That's because when I duplicated this mesh to make the blend shape target, I don't know if you can see it, but these values for the thumbs and curls and stuff like that, I didn't zero them out. So as a result, this model over here is deformed beforehand because I duplicated what the fingers bent. So now when I channel that in here, the fingers are bent. There are ways to fix that if that happens, but the best way to fix it is don't do it. So try to zero out all your controls and not have any deformations going on. Alright, so when you duplicate your mesh to create your blend shape target. That's going to be really important for you to handle. Um, but there are ways around it using set like deformer memberships. You can read the Maya documentation on that. It's pretty straightforward. It's basically saying I don't want these vertices to be affected by this deformer. And a blend shape really is nothing. It's just a deformer node, and because of that, you can edit the membership of the things in it. We'll kind of get into some of that stuff in a little bit. Okay, so there we go. We've got this little thing over here. What we have now is kind of a pipeline that is very handy. So any deformation we do here for our face ends up getting channeled over here. Now, the reason why I split this apart is so that you don't have the trouble of making clusters and things like that move on your body rig, because they're pretty unstable, especially when you start spinning and twisting and doing flips and things like that. Clusters and stuff like that, which are oftentimes necessary, or even lattices, you limit what you can do. Wire deformers are really finicky when you start moving them around in world space. So by when you put stuff on the body rig, especially for facial controls, the stuff starts getting really unstable, and so it's easier to do it on something that's not going to move, and then channel that back into the body and move the body around and just layer the face stuff in on top. That's the whole principle behind this. It just adds stability and makes it easier to edit things. Plus, by putting it over here, you don't limit yourself as to what kinds of deformers you can use. You can use lots of different solutions to give you what you want for deformation of face. So that way you don't paint yourself into a corner saying, oh, I can't use wire deformers because I can't find out a way to make them work nice with the body. There are ways to do it, but they're not simple, and I don't find that those ways are always reliable. I always seem to run into situations where, gee, I thought that was fixed, and it isn't, and that's just kind of how the way it goes a lot of times. So we're in a pretty good shape over here, you know. That's not what I wanted to be moving. This. So we've got our stuff all riveted on here, and that's really nice and really cool. So we're kind of in a situation where we can start building in face controls. Now a lot of people will take and you know, they'll do facial blend shapes, and you can do all the different face combinations, but they're okay. But I like to do things directly on the character. Through time, I have come to appreciate the limitations and the flexibilities of different ways of handling things. I like being in what I call a creative mind space. There's a technical mind space. I like being there when I'm there. I like being in a creative mind space when I'm there. What I find when I switch back and forth between being technical and being creative, I mean, it's not a black bold line, but I find that it's difficult for me to stay in a creative space and get nice results if I'm constantly jumping back and forth. So something about being able to do things directly on a character for facial animation is really important to me, because CG animation has enough things in the way between me and the performance as it is. As a hand-drawn animator with a pencil and a piece of paper, there's nothing separating me from the results, right? What I draw is right there, and I have just finite and total control over it. As a stop-motion animator, the same way. There's a physical puppet, and I physically grab it and manipulate it and pose it with my hands. There's something tactile and real and honest about that it just shows up. And CG has long been said that it lacks a certain level of humanity to it, and it seems like such a weird accusation, but I've come to appreciate that observation. And it's true. There's something about the distance that this machine has. I mean, if I lose power, I've got nothing here. I've just got a big Cintiq. I don't have anything, no artifacts whatsoever of this. It's all digital. And so going into a space where, you know, if I select something and I have a bunch of attributes over here to manipulate the face, it's kind of switching over to this technical abstract thing. I'm dialing numbers, and to me, there's no other animator out there has to dial numbers except CG animators. I mean, you think you definitely think in terms of numbers with frames and stuff like that, but like rotational values, who thinks of these things? Only CG animators have to deal with it. And then we work with an even further abstract with F-curve editing. Now we're looking at mathematical artifacts of motion. It's so just separated. So anything I can do to bring control back onto the character and make it a crafting space is better. I feel the same way about kind of the remote, um, the little panels with the little widgets and the slideys. Those are pretty cool. I've used a bunch of them. I appreciate the mindset behind them, but they're also it's a slightly friendlier version of something, but it's still abstracted. I'm still moving something over here to pose something in here, and um, I a lot of times I will equate it to trying to pick up a fork with a magnet. Why not just use your hands? I mean, a magnet will do the job. You can use a strong enough magnet, and you can pick up a fork, and you can, if it's a strong enough magnet, you can eat with it. But why? I mean, if you can use your hands, use your hands. Or think of something that always puts something between you and whatever it is you want to do. There's always something mentally and creatively that's a break in that. So that's why I tend to do stuff that's a little bit more on the body. Another thing really quick, with two of these guys being red, this one will never render. We'll never see him. We'll turn him off, and all of his stuff will be just hidden away, and we won't deal with it. But it'll exist there, so as we move this guy around, do whatever we want with him, he's what we animate. This one is just our face system. And whatever controls we build will drive on this, and then feed back over into this. Okay. One thing I will do is I will just drag the default shader on him so I'm not confused as to which one I'm looking at, which can happen. Another thing you can do is when you're setting up face stuff, sometimes it comes in handy, make a new perspective view, and then just make your panels, panel layouts, two panes side to side, and you can make this one be perspective. And so you can kind of get this one and then see the results over here, kind of thing. All right. So that sometimes comes in very handy to be able to see how they're connected. Or maybe it's probably better if I just keep them in the order that they were. Right. So we just check over here, and in here we'll just kind of do this. All right. I use something that is a little bit different than a lot of the blend shapes and things like that. Blend shapes are morph targets, however you want to call them. But I use another free tool that you can get off of creativecrash.com. I'll bring this over here so you can see it. It's called the Soft Mod Manipulator. It's an older script. It's been around since 2005, and it was originally written for Windows 6 and 7. It has not been updated since then. That's kind of a shame, but it really doesn't need to be. The interface is a little clunky, and we'll kind of get into some of those things, and I'll show you what's important and what's not. But this is a really cool little widget that somebody made, and I think it's just fantastically clever as to what they're trying to do. It's basically smart clusters that have a nice fall off. So the way you make these things is will of course go to Creative Crash and download the tool and install it and all that stuff. But the way you make it is pretty simple. You create locators that kind of represent where you want these little controllers to be. And so what I do is I create a locator, and then I'll duplicate it, and I'm going to keep it simple here. Just going to put them and snap them. You hold down the V key, you can snap things to vertices. Don't know if you knew that, but now you do. And I'm just going to make a few of these, and not a very complex mouth, just and I'm only going to do maybe half the mouth. I won't worry about the other half, okay? Because I'm just going to show you the principle here. I'm not going to really get into rigging the whole character. All right, so you create these little doohickeys. They're just locators to help me kind of figure out where this stuff needs to be. I'm going to go ahead and put him in the mesh layer so that he's referenced and I don't accidentally select him 500,000 times. Okay, and then here's my little the little icon you get for your soft mod manipulator. All right, this tool has some prefixes. If you click in here, you can choose some basic emotive ones. I don't ever use a prefix. The name You can use whatever names you want here that are prefixed, but I just type my own. And you can do the side. Symmetry will work if you create the other side together, like if you do left and right, but it wants the zero of, that halfway point of the character to be at world 0. Since I duplicated him and moved him off, it's not at world 0. If I'd have moved him down in Y, I could do it, but that's just me being sloppy. But we won't turn on this, but it will create left and right together. So what I do is I just go ahead and let's say for this one right here, I'm going to select that, and I'm going to say low, lip, mid, and I'm going to put nothing as far as a side, and I create the manipulator. Doink, there we go. Alright, now this manipulator is, there's a whole bunch of little pieces in it, but really the important one is this kind of implicit sphere object. That's your controller. Alright, that's what will move and deform the mesh. Right now, nothing's happening because we haven't hooked up the mesh to it yet. We'll do that in a minute. But first, the step is to create all the controllers first, because the attaching the mesh is a once and done kind of deal. Again, the script hasn't been updated, so it has limitations, but it's really, really cool. Alright, you can change the handle scale. Okay, that will make it easier or harder to grab. The fall off is the influence. We'll get to that in a little bit. Okay, so here I will go ahead, I'll make the left low lip, and I'll create that manipulator, and I'll call this corner, and I'll create that, and then I'll call this up lip, and I'll create that, and then this will be not anything, so it would be up lip mid, and I create that. So I've got these manipulators here, okay, these little deformers, and if I show you the outliner, you'll see it creates a manip group, and inside the manipulation group is each one of these things. Now this top level node is not what you want to deal with. These are fairly complex creations. This right here is all that goes into making one of these things. It's pretty complex. There's a lot of really neat things going on here, but it works really, really well. You don't need to know all this jazz, although if you ever feel like studying something pretty cool, this is all done pretty well. There's a few extra nodes in there that may or may not be necessary, but just be careful that you don't go into the outliner and grab these things thinking you're going to move those. No. The thing you would deal with is these little spheres. Alright, now the one cool thing is these NURBS spheres, these solid ones, those just kind of change how it's where its center is. But before we get into that, let's go ahead and attach the mesh. Right now we have our soft mods all listed, and we select the mesh that we want to apply to this, and we hit attach. No feedback. Again, a tool has limitations. It should give you user feedback, but the easiest way to find out if it attached is to grab that and move it, and lo and behold, there you go, it moves it. Now the default fall off radius is only 1 world unit, so that may or may not be sufficient for what you want. So what you do is you just take what that NURBS thing selected, and you just dial up the offset, or the fall off radius. Now it's going to start pulling the upper lip, but we'll fix that. That's easy enough to fix. Alright, so this is what you want. But you see, that's got a nice fall off to it. Not a lot of fancy stuff going on here, just real simple, and it does a nice job. And I kind of like that 2.5. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select all of these little NURBS implicit objects. I'm going to go ahead and change their handle scale so they're a little bit easier to grab, and I'm going to set their fall off radius to 2.5. Alright, so now if I grab and move this one, it does a pretty nice job. And it pulls the upper, but we'll fix that right now. Alright, pretty cool. And with just a few controllers, you get some pretty nice blending. Alright, and the nice thing is it handles scale and rotate as well. So if I want, I can rotate this and then translate it out like this, and then I can also scale it in like this, and I can create a little pucker thing. If you want, you can take and well, can't make an expression now because it's influencing too much stuff, but it's got a nice fall off to it. It's really nice in the corners. I mean, it's really, really handy. It's just really sweet, and it's not something that takes a lot to set up, because this little tool here makes it really nice. Alright, so the thing here is you want to deal with membership, all right? Because what's happening, the reason why the upper lip is moving is because it is within the fall off radius of this particular controller. What you can do is you can choose to take all the stuff the upper lip and take it outside the controller's influence, and it won't affect it anymore. What you'll want to do actually is do that for the whole body, because there's no need for Maya to calculate how that little deformer is going to deform the feet. It's outside the fall off radius, but to make things better, you just go ahead and just select all this stuff and take it out. Well, here's how you do it. Pretty simple. You just go to this little tool, and down here just hit member. Member. Okay, I gotta select one and hit member. There we go. I knew there was something. And what this is going to do is it's going to bring up the membership painting tool. And this is just a way of quickly painting stuff to include or exclude from a deformer membership. Pretty simple. Add it to the deformer set, transfer to a different deformer set, or remove it completely. We just deal with remove. Alright, so just select one. This is the low corner or the left corner. Well, we don't need all this stuff. In fact, make our brush really big, and we just get rid of everything down here. And you do the whole body, that you know, all the arms and stuff that you don't need. Since this is the left corner over here, take this down. I'm going to paint out anything over here, because you know it's the wrong side of the body. It's not going to influence it. Okay. The one bad thing about the painting sometimes is I'm sure there's a setting to change this, but you got to spin the character around, and sometimes the view isn't exactly perfect, and you'll have a stray thing. You don't have to be too finicky about it, but thoroughness is always its own reward, because it pays you back later on with fewer headaches, fewer stray vertices flying off when your character starts smiling or whatever. Alright, so pretty quick, and take those things out, and this is just for the mouth. Give yourself a little bit of room to work with so it doesn't fall off too tightly. Okay? And you just do that for all of these. This is the low lip one. I'm not going to do the whole body. I don't want to bore you with that. But you would do that to all these. But the low lip one, you would just paint out all the parts of the body that aren't, you know, necessary. And for our purposes here, we really want to paint out the upper lip, because we don't want that stuff to be sliding around when we do our thing. Take the brush down a little bit, and that'll be good enough for now. Alright, and then this upper lip one, we'll do the opposite. We'll paint out the membership of the lower lip stuff, so we don't have goofiness there. Alright, the lower lip mid, so we'll take the upper lip stuff out. And the feedback color that Maya gives you is, I don't know, looks like baby poo. It's a rather ugly color, but hey, it's their choice, not mine, right? Okay, that's enough-ish. And I'm doing this very, very quickly. This is the up lip, mid, so we paint out the lower lip. Again, you would be more thorough in your efforts. This is just a quick little slap together to show you that this is how this stuff works. Okay, so now when we start moving this stuff around, we should start seeing that, you know, it doesn't affect the upper lip, and the upper lip doesn't affect the lower lip. Pretty simple, your basic kind of stuff. But again, it's kind of cool. You can do some neat things with it if you want to, and it's easy. It's nice to just kind of sculpt something and make a shape that you want to make. You know, I just like it that you can just quickly and nicely and easily just make some neat, good-looking shapes very interactively. You know, to get the kinds of things you want from your performance. So some of these are going to be a little sloppy because my my membership editing is not as good as it could be. You know, and you may need to do some things like rotate some stuff and things like that. There we go. It's a little bit better. Let me take this and kind of rotate it that way. Do some things and kind of pull it off that way. And you know, maybe scale it this way a little bit. So you see, there's a lot of things you can do with it, and it's all very interactive. It's like posing. Um, you know, it's kind of ugly, but you kind of get the idea. Um, it's really neat for kind of sculpting face shapes because it's a nice set of controls. Okay, so I will kind of undo all that fun stuff. Oh, the one thing that this thing does here, this little sphere, is it changes it's kind of like its center of influence, okay, without necessarily deforming it. We'll see that differently when we take all of these things, set the scales back to 1, and it rotates and translates back to 0. Alright, so if I take this thing and move it, it deforms, right? But if I take this little sphere thing right here and move it, it doesn't deform, but what it does is it kind of changes where the deformation is applied. It's like moving the region, okay? Which is kind of cool. It comes in really handy. So these things aren't fixed in place, which is another reason why they're so much better than clusters, because clusters are very much tied to a set of things that you select and say, put them in here. This is far more flexible. Using these little things you can move this stuff around, you can say, oh gosh, that's not in the right place, I wish it was up just a little bit. Well, you can grab the whole thing and just move your region up a little bit. Now, the one thing you can't do is you can't move it outside the region of stuff that you painted. Okay, so if you start moving it down to outside of where you selected things to be in, it'll have a sharp edge and won't look very good. But that's still pretty cool, when you get right down to it. It's kind of pretty spiffy. Alright, so you can animate this way. You can put him, if you want, you can take this whole rig setup and you can put it someplace in the world like, minus 100 on the Y translate or something. Put a special camera looking at it right there, and you can use it as kind of like a face panel, but it's a face panel where the interface is not wires against empty space, it's sculpting a face. And so you can see that, and it's pretty nice, and you can just check your camera view to do that. You can also take it one step further, which is what I'm going to show you now, because I think it's a pretty handy way of doing things, where you put the controllers right on your rendered character, and that information drives back into this one, and then this drives back over into this one. But we do it in such a way that it doesn't cycle, and Maya doesn't barf on its own shoes. Okay? So this is a good place for us to save the scene. Monster 5. And we wait. Hard drive's got to spin up. And there we go. Okay. So we're kind of done with this thing for now. It's done its job. Pretty spiffy. So here's what we're going to do is we're going to use the rivet thing again to give ourselves the controllers we want right on here. And you don't need to keep these locators. You can get rid of those. They're just there to build them, and you can get rid of it later. Oh, by the way, all your rivets live in a group called DJ Rivet X, and it's got all the follicles in there. Okay. Right. So what we want to do is we want to build controllers right on the face. So I will just show you a quick little example, and I'm not going to build again the whole character, but I will just go ahead and do what I can. That's a leftover rivet from the time when I did the video, and you guys did not get to watch it because the recorder stopped working. Alright, the controller, real simple. Create a NURBS sphere, and then put it up somewhere where you want to put a controller. Okay, and we're going to stick this so that it floats with the face. Alright, so just make a little thing right there, and in your hypershade, go ahead and create a material and use a surface shader. This has no shading whatsoever, no dark or light or anything, and just pick a color you like. Let's say green. We like green. Now let's get crazy. Let's go cyan. Alright, you see it has no shading to it, and we can just go ahead and apply that to the little doohickey. So what we end up with is that something that's like it's just a dot. in front of the character. And whichever angle you look at it, it's just a dot, which is kind of nice. You can also make it semi-transparent if you want. But what I like to do is take this thing and channel it back into the other. So let's go ahead and take our panels and look at our layouts. Our two panes side to side. Oh yeah, that's right. Alright, so you do this with something called the connection editor. Pretty simple. So you go to Window, General Editors, Window, pull it over here, General Editors, Connection Editor. Alright, what this does is it just gives you a way of hooking things up. Some of you are going to be like, I already know this. Yeah, but a lot of people don't. So there you go. What this will do is take attributes and plug them from one to the other. It's a very, very powerful tool. So this is the source side, so we load this side, and this lists all of the attributes that are possible on this thing. And over here we're going to select that sphere, not the NURBS surface one, but just that implicit object, and we'll put it over here. And what we'll do is we want to pipe the translate to the translate, oops, the reason why I did that is because I forgot to zero that thing out. So we will undo that. It's very important that when you put these things over here, you zero them out. Modify, freeze transforms, because it's taking the values. So what it did is this was like, it was created at world 00, then I moved it up here, so it was like world unit like 75, whatever. Well, as soon as it did that, I was like, oh, I got to be 75 now. So it shot it way up in the air. All right. So my mistake is your learning opportunity. All right, translate to translate. Okay, rotate to rotate, scale to, not shear, to scale. Okay, just create that. And that's pretty much it. So now when we move this around, hot diggity doody, it moves it. Now I set it to the shear, which was rather unfortunate. Shear is a really weird attribute, so sometimes if it looks that way, it's because you put it to the wrong thing. So hit scale. There we go. So now this should behave normally. Alright, there you go. You rotate it, okay, and you can also scale it so that, you know, whatever you need to do. And every animator understands translate, rotate, and scale. It's very simple. Okay, which is all really well and good and kind of quite cool. The problem comes when we start rotating the head. Wait, but it's not it doesn't go. How come it's not going? Well, it's not stuck to the surface yet. So what we need to do is use our little rivet system to stick it to the surface of the skin so that wherever he goes, his little controller for his face goes with him. Now here's the thing. We do not want this to double transform, and I'll show you what I mean by that. So first thing you need to do is in your outliner, here's our little NURB sphere. We'll just call this low, lip, mid, control. Alright. Is select it and group it. Now the group is going to be at world 000, so you'll need to then modify center pivot for the group and call it, you know, low, lip, mid, control, group. If you want, call it whatever makes sense to you. So what we have is that underneath the group. Now what you need to do is you need to put that under another group. I have a little Mel script for my rigging that, you know, I wrote that does that really nice. So now what I have is a group. I'll just call this something different. You know, I'll call this. I don't know what I want to call it. Maybe a null. Whatever. I don't. Just cheeseburger. Call it cheeseburger, right? So what we have is the control underneath an empty group, underneath another empty group. Then what we do, remembering our little rivet tool, is you take the top group and then the mesh. So we take this top group and this mesh and we do a rivet. Okay? So now what happens when we move this thing here, if we move his head around, oh, this is one of those instances where the rivet probably went down to world 0, right? Because my UV work is crud. So I will undo that one, and just for the sake of this, your UV work will not be sloppy like mine is. I'm just going to move it over here so that I actually get some geometry coordinates. And just for fun, I will go ahead and freeze transforms again, just for fun. If you do your UV stuff right, it won't matter. I took a in-progress character that I never really fixed right. So, alright, do that one more time. Take this, and rivet it, and now, if we take the head, there we go. See how his little controller goes with him? Pretty spiffy, huh? That's pretty cool. But it does create one problem. When I translate, wait, how come his controller's flying way off of his face? Well, there is no cycle warning down here because it's a legal operation, but this little thing is being transformed twice. Why? Well, one, I'm moving the object. Alright, so this object is being moved, whatever that number is. But it's also attached to the surface by its parent. So its parent is also being moved, however much the surface is moving. So it's moving twice as far. So the mesh only goes this far, but the controller goes twice as far because it's moving, which causes the mesh to move, which causes its parent to move. You can rewind that if that didn't make sense to you, but it makes sense. So what we need to do is kind of trick our mind into thinking that it's not moving twice, even though it is. So this is probably the most esoteric thing that I'm going to show you in this whole rigging business. All right, it's pretty cool though. All right, it's really quite cool, and in that sense, you got some pretty. This opens up a door that you can keep going down into a rabbit hole and exploring, or you can just say, you know what, this is all I want to know about that. But what we're going to do is fool this thing into kind of taking its values and reversing them and taking this extra parent group right here and moving it against itself. All right, so to do this, I will take our, I usually work with the hypershade. The hypergraph is ugly to me. I don't like it. Make a new thing. So this, you can go and you can right click and choose, oh, I forget what it is. Graph. Add selected to graph. You can't even see that. It's off your recording area. So you can go to graph, add selected to graph. What that will do is it kind of takes the object that you have loaded and it puts it into a blank slate so you can do something with it. Okay? Then what we're going to do is we're going to create something called, these are all right click, create. You're going to use a general utility and you're going to use probably, let's do a multiply divide. Okay? A multiply divide node is a pretty simple node. It has an input and an output and whether, or two inputs, okay, and an operation. What that does is it's saying, I'm going to take whatever you pipe into input 1 on any, and you got 3 possible channels, and I'm going to multiply it by whatever the value is in input number 2. Or we can also choose divide or power or no operation at all. Let's just do multiply because that's what we want. So what we want to do is we want to take the translation of our little sphere deal right here, our little control, and we want to put that into input number 1. How do you do that? Well, the easiest way is to click this little triangle, click, and it brings up a little context menu. So let's bring it up here so you can see it. Click, and here's all the possible things you can thread. Well, we want to take our translate, and we can do individually translate X, or we can do all 3 of them if this little thing over here has 3 inputs, X, Y, and Z. Well, it does. So we can just do translate and then select translate, and it creates this little thread. Like, whoa, what's that? Well, that's a connection that's waiting to be made. And where do you make it? You come here and you click on that and you put input 1. Doink. Now all of a sudden you see all this over here turned yellow? That's because it has created this connection. The low lip mid translate is now connected into the multiply divide input 1. So if we take this guy and we move him around and then we select this dude, we see his values are the same values. Okay? Now what we want to do is we want to take and multiply these by -1. Right, because remember, this is a demultiply. So we're taking 0.434, multiplying it by -1. That gives you a negative 0.434 on the x. Or whatever this thing happens to be when we move it around, it's always going to be multiplied by -1. Great, what does that do? Well, then we take that and feed it into something else. So here's what we do. We take this parent of this dude, this little controller, and we can go ahead and add him to our graph. Graph, add selected, hooray, and we create a new thread connection. But this time we're going to use, we click here, we choose output. We can do XYZ individually, or we can do all three. In this instance, we want to do all three together, so we just choose output. And we come over here and we click and we hold it and we get ourselves anything we want to put it into. Well, I want to put it into the translate. Doink. So there you go. What did that just do? Well, that just took, and whatever our value is here, 0.907, it took its parent and made it negative 907. Now think about that for a minute. It is kind of cool, and I will show you what I mean. It magically stopped this thing from moving twice as far. Alright, if you need to think about the math for that, go ahead, but I can go ahead and draw it out for you pretty quick. If I move an apple, actually let's say I put an apple on a wagon, and I move, and that wagon itself is on another wagon, and putting the apple over here also moves this wagon over here, but then this apple's on top of that wagon, and this one right here is negative. It moves it back this way, so the apple feels like it's back here. It's kind of weird, but anyways, like I said, it's the most esoteric thing that I'm going to do in all this rigging stuff. And it's the closest thing that you come to real hardcore rigging, because to be honest with you, a lot of hardcore rigging is done with nodes, connection nodes and stuff like that. And now you, the lowly and intimidated, frightened little animator, okay, not lowly or frightened or intimidated, but you, the animator, can now say, well, just use a math node for that, and people will look at you like you are now smart. Or they'll just look at you like they look at me like, what are you talking about? So anyways, and that's that, okay? And that is pretty much the end of that deal. So wherever we move him around, we take this little doohickey and we move it, and it's all right here on the character, and it's all well and good and fantastic. And so then what we do is we take all this stuff over here. You take all of these, you take the rivets, and I don't need that camera anymore or anything. You just take all this business, and what I like to do, I like to make groups called certain things at the top level of my outliner, so that when I open my outliner I can see what's where. My geometry is in one place. Well, this body 1 is actually, it's my blend shape target, and I don't want that in the geometry, because the geometry is the stuff that's rendered. So I'm just going to put that out here. Alright, so I got whatever is going to be rendered geometry, I put it in something called geometry. And then all this other stuff, the skeleton, the rig, the rivets, the manipulators, the blend shapes, the controls, I put all those into a group called rig. So now, and inside of that group, I'll take the stuff that's over here, this target and these manipulators, and I'll make another group, and I'll call that deformers. Right, and I can take and hide all my deformers, and now my scene is real simple. I can template this thing, I can lock all these attributes so I don't accidentally move them, which is a really good idea. And you just kind of fireproof your rig. And this is the easiest way to do it, just through, put things in hierarchies, name them appropriately, and lock off the things. But the things you really want to be careful to lock off will be your deformers and your face setup, so that you don't accidentally pull things away. The skeleton, I hide the skeleton so that I don't accidentally select it. Alright. A lot of times I will use display layers to help me out. This temp layer is actually the controls, so I will call them controls. And a lot of times mine doesn't like the same name twice, so I put layer and save that. So my controls layer, if I want to turn those on and off, I can do that. I have a hotkey to turn off NURBS curves, which is really nice. Set up little hotkeys to do stuff like this. Alright, and I have one that turns off NURBS surfaces too, so I can turn off my face controls. But you can take your face controls and put those in a layer, however you want to handle it. I like little hotkeys because they're really fast. It allows me to do the things I want to do, and I'll need to grab a controller, and now I can turn it off and just kind of move my character and pose them and not be encumbered by a whole bunch of junk in the interface, because the lines tend to get pretty cluttered. Again, it's just removing the stuff between me and the character. It allows me to make better performances and think more about shapes, because I don't have all these things blending in the shape, and you know, this is not clean. This is not simple or easy to look at. If you just squint your eyes, there's a lot of noise here visually with all these lines and everything like that. So by being able to get rid of that sort of thing, you can really help yourself out. These little follicles will also be kind of annoying to look at, so you just take your rivet group and hide that. You know, so it's pretty simple to set this stuff up so that you don't get yourself in trouble. And again, you take your rivets, and you know, that's all stuff that isn't, it's set to not move. The script actually takes care of accidentally moving these things. When it builds them, it turns off the translates, which is really good. Okay, so that's pretty much it, you know. And you can blend this out, or you can make as robust or as simple as you want. But this is how I set up characters roughly. Of the face, this is pretty much exactly how I set up characters. The body, I get a little more adventuresome about some things because I want different things. But for just a simple setup rig using free tools that you can download off the internet and put them together, it's not too shabby. You know, there are worse ways to get things done, that's for sure. This is way better than it used to be 10 years ago when you had to do all this stuff by hand. And you figure out what in the world, you know, this is all just building off of things we've been figuring out for 10 or 11 years in Maya, and that's building on top of things that happened before even that. So, I mean, I remember the old VeggieTale rigs I had in Soft Image in the late 90s. You know, it was literally just little crosses all over the screen, and you had to know what they were for. And you literally had to know which, you know, just a whole bunch of selection handles. You had to know what they were for. It was impossible. So we've certainly come a long way as far as user interfaces for animators. So there you go, man. I don't have, I mean, there's a lot more about rigging, but we're going to wrap up the VTS with this video. It's been awesome. It's been a fantastic 5.5 years almost. So you guys humble me, and it's been awesome. And I thank you all for the opportunity to share with you these things through the years, and have you be there with me along for the ride. And so in the future, I will make more videos, but I will probably make my future ones free and just put them on my YouTube channel. And so if you want to see future stuff, if I get ideas for new things, just keep an eye on my YouTube channel. I'll try and keep that a little more active now. So there you go. All the best. God bless.